Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle. Thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. Brand new week, Tuesday, 10:30 Eastern Time, streaming to you on Rumble. Rumble.com/amradpod is where you find us. 10:30 Eastern Time, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Grateful to have you along for the ride with us today. If you are here, make sure you smash the thumbs up and follow the channel. If you listen to the audio format of the podcast, do subscribe at iTunes, at iHeart, Spotify, any of those platforms so you get the show updates when they hit you. And we are right into it today on a brand new week. We're talking about getting out of the woods a little bit. We're talking about Eithan Haim finally has that monkey off his back. The DOJ dismissed charges. Pete Hegseth made it through the confirmation process just barely by the skin of his teeth. DEI continues to DIE under the Trump administration. And then a discussion about FISA 702 also could be on the chopping block. Excited to talk about all of that. So much more. Grateful to have you on the American Radicals Podcast. We are emblematic of uniquely American values on this program because I guess Captain America no longer does, per Anthony Mackie, the new Captain America, who said that Captain America does not represent America, despite it being in his titular character's name. So hopefully, if you were planning on going and watching that, you can just stick with us over at the American Radicals Podcast. So let's bring on Garrett at GOB Actual for a brand new week. Excited to see you, my friend. Hope it was a great weekend. Ready to get after it.
Can't complain. You know, Steve, listening to the intro, it dawned on me. Being a founding suspendable is perhaps the crowning achievement of my life, at least my quote-unquote professional life.
Well, if you were a superhero in movies forever, be known like that's James Bond, that's Thor, that's the Terminator, like something like that of that magnitude, and you turned around and took the actual title of your character and said, the values of the Terminator are not to terminate. The values of Captain America are not American. You deserve the bomb that's coming. And maybe we'll get a little bit of the change, the scraps of change will come our way here at the American Radicals Podcast. So I'm here for it. And I'm also here to talk about our friend Eithan Haim, who put out finally that the DOJ under the new leadership there, I mean, Ed Martin, I know, took over as the acting U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. But I know that Pam Bondi was on her way in and going to be the new attorney general, and Eithan Haim, who has been up against it, where the federal government went after him. For those who don't remember, surgeon, worked for Texas Children's Hospital, said, hey, they're violating Texas law. They're providing meatball surgery and hormones to children here, which is against the Texas law, reported it. And the DOJ went after him for some sort of ridiculous HIPAA violation, saying that he was not allowed to have access to the medical records at the hospital where he worked, and he risked it all. That's a suspendable move there. So this is the actual dismissal of charges, and it's highlighted dismissed with prejudice.
With prejudice.
That's excellent, because that means, for those who don't know, that they can't bring charges again for the exact same thing. If they say without prejudice, they say we reserve the right to maybe come at you if further evidence presents itself, or maybe a communist gets elected president, we'll come after you again. But now he's basically got a preemptive pardon, if you will, for lack of a better term.
You know, Steve, it dawns on me. I don't know if we've ever talked about this. You, if anybody, it would be you who at least has thought this, but the similarity between what the FBI accused you of doing and then what he was accused of doing here with this HIPAA violation. You were accused of improperly accessing documents, policy, guidelines, rules, regulations that every single FBI employee has access to. Similarly, here, he was accused of and then charged with accessing files at the hospital that he worked at. And it's apropos for the government, or at least the government that existed 7 days and beyond ago, because it seems like things have turned on a dime, which should raise concern, actually, because what does it tell you about government employees? Oh, I guess in reality, what does it tell you about people in general? That they are just willing to go along. They are willing to just do what they're told. And now we are already hearing rumblings of subversion and resistance, and FBI employees not obeying orders to assist with these ICE roundups and deportations, things of that nature. But overall, it's just business as usual, just going along to get along. But I guess circling back to Eithan and his case, we got to name names, and I will name Paul Nixon's name whenever this story comes up. Paul Nixon, if you don't know, is the FBI agent who spearheaded this from the DOJ side of things. And if you had a reasonable law enforcement officer, this would have been closed immediately. As soon as you get the lead and say, okay, it's a doctor accessing files, because as the FBI agent, you should have the requisite understanding of the violation that you're working. In this instance, it's going to be white collar or healthcare fraud or something along those lines. And this FBI agent shows up, knocks on the door, pursues this case, I would say maliciously. But guess what, Paul? Times are changing, my friend. And you've got your name and your files exist in the FBI system. So good luck. But hey, those security clearances, those things are a damned thing, because the executive branch can suspend them for any reason.
That's something that I would like to see exercise with maximum, I don't know, retribution. I'd like to just used properly. I think you lack loyalty to your oath.
Yep.
If you use your position of authority to go after people improperly. So I would love to see the Navy versus Egan Supreme Court ruling, which was used for you and me and so many like us, where the agencies said, well, we have wide latitude per Supreme Court when it comes to issuing and suspending and revoking security clearances, so we can make you indefinitely unpaid, suspended forever for all of time, whenever we see fit, and you can't question that. Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So hopefully we'll see that applied with maximum latitude for the righteous reasons here. Let's move over to the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who made it through the confirmation process by a vote of 51-50. Confirmed. Pete Hegseth. This is from the Daily Signal. President Donald Trump's defense secretary nominee, Pete Hegseth, confirmed 51-50, with the decisive vote coming from Vice President Vance. The only defectors from the Republican Party were Lisa Murkowski, who we talked about over the weekend, Susan Collins from Maine, and then old Glitch McConnell decided to, reveal his true colors to a certain extent.
Yeah, did you see him waddle over to the Democrats after he casted his no vote and shook their hands?
Well, I really do enjoy the media portrayal of characters. So you see like the upshot of Pete Hegseth from Daily Signal, where it's almost like the Obama-esque aura around his head.
Yeah.
And you contrast that with the follow-up story that I have from the Daily Wire
Oh, this is gonna
about
be good.
Mitch
Oh,
McConnell.
hey,
where
Glitchy. How you doing, Glitch?
That actually might be from the moment where he froze up. It looked a lot like that. He looks like the turtle without a bottom jawline, and that's appropriate. I don't feel bad for him at all. He's grasped onto power for far too long.
Mm-hmm.
And this reporting about his no vote, because there's a quote that was given. Again, I don't know if he issued the quote because I think he's probably a lot like Joe Biden at this point.
Yeah, unable to issue quotes because he's a muttering old geriatric fool.
So this is the quote that came out. I mean, it's long, but I do think that there's some of it. And at the end, they can't help but give away the game. So this is from Mitch McConnell's office, we'll say. Quote, effective management of nearly 3 million military and civilian personnel, an annual budget of nearly $1 trillion, and alliances and partnerships around the world is a daily test with staggering consequences for the security of the American people and our global interests. Mr. Hegseth has failed as yet to demonstrate he will pass this test. And here's the key point. He wouldn't even commit to growing America's defense investment beyond the low bar set by the Biden administration's budget request. So he does
There it
not
is.
indicate to Mitch McConnell that he is willing to expand the military-industrial complex.
And that's what this boils down to, isn't it? So I don't know if this is the case with Lisa Murkowski. I'd have to do a little more digging. But Alaska, for a small, well, okay. I
The
almost-
largest geographical state.
Yes, I almost put my foot in my mouth massively there. It's not a small state by any means, but population-wise, it's very tiny. However, there's a fair amount of military up there. I was stationed up there in Fort Wainwright, Alaska, just basically attached to Fairbanks. Fort Greely is not that far away. There's a couple Air Force bases up there. Down in Anchorage, there's a joint Air Force and Army base, and so that's a big piece of Alaska's economy to some degree, certainly to their relative importance in the Union, I suppose. But I did look at Mitch McConnell a little bit. I saw some tweet with their DC phone numbers, and it was like, everybody start calling. And I was like, oh yeah, Mitch McConnell, Kentucky. What the hell's wrong with people in Kentucky? And then for some reason, I was like, I wonder what part of Kentucky he represents. And I went and looked. And he represents the part of Kentucky that includes Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I know this because I just punched in Oak Grove, Kentucky senator, because that's where I used to live. Fun fact, when I was stationed there at Fort Campbell, I lived in Oak Grove, Kentucky, and it's basically a border town on the border with Tennessee. Half of Fort Campbell is in Tennessee. The other half is in Kentucky, roughly. But the post office on base, here's a tidbit for you. The reason it's Fort Campbell, Kentucky is because the post office is on the Kentucky side. I digress. But Mitch McConnell has always been military industrial complex first. And that's what this boils down to. And that's what this vote should show everyone. Over the weekend, there was another tweet, I think it was over the weekend, of the last 10, roughly, Secretary of Defenses and what the votes were. And it was almost not always 90 or above to like 3 or 5 or 7. And then Hegseth 50-50. And the originator of the tweet said something like, this shows that Pete Hegseth is not capable.
He's not qualified.
Not qualified.
Yeah.
And it's like, actually, no, this shows the military industrial complex is number 1 in Washington, D.C.
And it also shows how the parties no longer agree on the end destination, right? It used to be we agree on the end destination just on the route we should take to get there. Now it's half the sides want to burn everything to the ground, and the other side is saying, well, no, we can still get along as long as we just fund the military industrial complex. It's at a point now where you're going to see the closer to 50-50 than you ever have, unless, of course, there's a Democrat president, because then the Lisa Murkowskis and the ideological people, even like the Rand Pauls, will say things like, look, I don't agree with them politically, but they're qualified to fill this position. I think the president is entitled to that. That's a very old view of things. I think it's more optimal. I think it's not reflective of where we are now in a system where the social compact is broken.
Yeah.
And you talked about being in Kentucky. So for a time of your life, Mitch McConnell was your senator, Garrett.
Horrible, right?
And I looked historically at the last election that Mitch McConnell ran in 2020. I didn't care necessarily about the general election. I cared about the primary, because Norm and Normie from the suburbs just can't be bothered. So for all the wailing and gnashing of teeth, and the audience here is the exception. They're the uber involved and aware, and they're actually paying attention to these things, but you got to recruit your neighbors here. So I have a nice visual of the primary result from 2020 with Mitch McConnell, who won his primary with 82.8% of the vote.
It's disgusting.
Just slightly more than 400,000 Republicans voted in this. I failed here, Garrett. Your reaction, because I'm actually going to get the total number of Republicans in the state of Kentucky. Stand by.
Oh yeah. Overall, again, it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago. What the hell is wrong with people in Kentucky? Has Mitch McConnell not been in government long enough for you to realize that he doesn't really have your best interests at heart? And yet nearly 400,000 of you are going to turn out to vote in the primary, and then to usher him back in to I don't want to say running unopposed, but essentially he's held on to that ring of power in that area of Kentucky for, I want to say, damn near 30 years.
This is great. There are 400,000 who voted in 2020. In 2020, so pretty spot on, 3.4 million Republicans in the state of Kentucky. 3 million people stayed home.
Even if a quarter of them showed up in the primary,
equal opportunity critics, anybody who's bashing Los Angeles for the fires that burned down their entire area, saying you voted for it. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's ripping on New York for the fact that you can't walk into a subway without being set on fire or pushed in front of an oncoming train car. And we say, you voted for it. Hey, Kentucky, you voted for it.
Right.
By not voting, you voted for it.
That's your vote. So, live with it. You made your bed because you needed to go to Chick-fil-A that much more badly after work instead of going to vote. I don't know, because I don't get it. I really don't. It's mind-boggling, Steve, to have 4 million and maybe 400,000 show up to vote in the primary.
This is every single time. This is every single primary. This is how you get the John Cornyn's. This is how you get the Joni Ernst. This is how you get the Lisa Murkowski's. I mean, that's a little bit different because it's ranked choice voting.
I wonder historically when this turned, or has it long been since the 1800s that people don't show up to primaries? Because this is the pandemic of the politosphere. If you're not going to show up to the primary, then you get what you get. And so what, people show up to vote on actual election day and say, well, Mitch McConnell, he's better than the Democrat. Is he? I don't know. I'd rather get a rookie, a freshman Democrat than super senior Mitch McConnell, because a freshman Democrat's not going to have any power. And I would rather have a freshman Democrat with no power than a Mitch McConnell with a ton of power.
This has been my conspiracy theory forever. I don't know if you remember this when you were a little kid, but people said, I don't vote because that's how you get jury duty. I think the deep state planted that rumor out there.
Yeah.
Because they wanted people to stay home.
Just like they planted crack cocaine in America's ghettos.
Oh, gosh. Now you're going to get us banned from YouTube. So all 8 people are not going to watch it. All right. Let's go to something good, or at least the potential for good, because we have railed against FISA Section 702 and the fact that the Republicans signed on for renewal of FISA for the next 2 years. And it allows searches and queries into Americans without a warrant. I mean, this is collected even in the most maximum latitude, maximum grace that you would give. You would say, look, the United States government is collecting the electronic communications of foreign actors when they are overseas, and we incidentally collect on Americans. And we have them in this database, but we don't need a warrant to go look for it whenever we want. And it's been used and abused to the tune of millions. In fact, the FBI was bragging that they had reduced the illegal FISA abuses by 95%, which means they only violated Fourth Amendment rights like 300,000 times last year.
Yeah, all the people who voted for Mitch McConnell in the primary. It's the same number, roughly.
So headline, USA, and hat tip to Garrett for catching this one. This eluded my attention. Slipped this one past the goalie on me. Ken Silva, love him over there, does really good work. Warrantless FISA searches are unconstitutional. Dun, dun, a judge says in a landmark ruling. This judge, her name is LaShawn Hall. Last week, in a case, this individual's name is Agron Hasbaijarami. I can't say it. Apologies to this person who was likely a terrorist, but nevertheless, he still were owed due process rights because he was an American. He was arrested in 2011 at JFK International Airport after buying a one-way flight to travel to Turkey. He pleaded guilty a year later, sentenced to 15 years in prison for trying to travel to Pakistan and join a radical jihadist insurgent group. But while in prison, he was notified by the federal government some evidence against him. It was exculpatory evidence. Or at least it was
Oh.
true to the poisonous tree
Mhm.
because the evidence against him had been gathered via FISA 702. And Garrett, before we react to this, I love these remarks from the judge. Quote, simply acquiring the defendant's communications under Section 702, albeit lawfully, again, it was incidental, right? Did not, in and of itself, permit the government to later query the retained information. To hold otherwise would effectively allow law enforcement to amass a repository of communications under Section 702, including those of U.S. persons that can later be searched on demand without limitation. So exactly what our ex-girlfriend at the FBI has been doing, 95% better, but the tone of Mitch McConnell's vote count over 300,000 times from 2020, this is the judge calling out. That's unconstitutional. I mean, I think this is a question for every other judge or every other attorney who has had this come before them. Were you not, and a movie reference, you must have been absent the day they taught law at law school, A Few Good Men.
Yeah, the reason I'm happy that Ken put this out there is because FISA related cases, court cases, are scant. They are few and far between. I pulled this up because when I saw Ken's tweet about that, it made me think back to like the beginning of when I started doing these Substacks. I wrote this Substack 4 months roughly after I had been suspended, and in it I went digging for court cases. I got to scroll down somewhere around here, way down, right here, and there were 2 I could find that were relevant, maybe 3. One from 2022, one from 1997, one from 2008, 2013, Clapper versus Amnesty International. And when you look at, and one of those I think went to the Supreme, or both of those I think went to Supreme Court. But it's so rare because it's all shrouded in secrecy. And we've talked about it before, how FISA was the brainchild that was supposed to fix some of the abuses, but it's gotten turned on its head. I would argue that from its inception, it essentially has been part of the weaponization of the government against Americans. In theory, it's supposed to be a legitimate and good safeguard to protect Americans here, but that's not what it does, as we talk about often, and as this case that Ken Silva wrote about discusses too, because FISA inherently, the power that the government has gets corrupted. I don't know how many examples from our own history we need to point to. There are countless throughout world history that governments always go down this path of tyranny. And so for a court, for finally a judge to step in, one, to even take a FISA case like this, and then 2, to rule that it was unconstitutional. Hopefully good things are ahead, but then I get a little leery again, because even Pam Bondi in her confirmation hearing was talking about how it's a good thing and it's a good tool and we need it. And then you had Tulsi Gabbard flip-flop on it recently because she's basically seeking to get confirmed. And that goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning of this episode with the ICE raids, and just complying, just doing what you need to do, just following orders, just going along to get along so you can get to that next hurdle or that next step of your career. It's a dangerous and slippery slope. I will say Pam Bondi also did reference the backdoor searches and how that is problematic, but we've been beating this drum forever, essentially, or at least as long as the suspendables have been an institution.
They have not even signed on for something reasonable, like get a warrant to search for things. If I am conducting a search of your vehicle as a police officer and I come across a container inside the vehicle, like a safe that looks like you might have I don't know, ripped out of a safety deposit box wall of inside of a bank. I can't go into that. I have to get a separate warrant for that.
Mm-hmm.
That would seem to be like I came across it incidentally, almost like I came across incidental communications, and I have probable cause to believe that there is a crime here, that you might have ripped this out of the wall of inside of a bank vault. I'll go get a warrant for that to say, oh, look, there's passports and personal identifying information here that isn't yours. It likely isn't yours, and you probably robbed the bank.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that hard to get a warrant.
No.
This is the process. And I'm sorry, not sorry, that it's inconvenient. Law enforcement isn't supposed to be convenient. It's supposed to always err on the side of the citizen.
Yes.
Innocent until proven guilty. That's the way it works. One last comment that came from the judge, I think that really sums it up, and then we'll move on to the DEI. Quote from this judge, again, her name is LaShawn Hall. Thank you, Judge Hall. Quote, while communications of U.S. persons may nonetheless be intercepted, incidentally or inadvertently, it would be paradoxical to permit warrantless searches of the same information that Section 702 is specifically designed to avoid collecting.
I mean, you would think that this is rocket science. Finally, a judge with just practical, sound legal theory. This is the exact type of stuff that is taught in every constitutional law 101 course or criminal law 101 course, which it really, I really do struggle mentally with it, because I think back to those early college courses or even my early days as a cop, and you just expect that this is how law enforcement works in this nation. But then you get people like Chrissy Ray complaining about, oh, we need the tool, we need it, and we've taken measures to fix the Fourth Amendment violations that we do, but they're a lot less than they were, but they're still hundreds of thousands a year. And it's like, this is precisely why you should have to get a warrant.
Only
And
the
like,
government would compliment itself for violating people's rights to the tune of hundreds of thousands of times annually.
mm-hmm. I wonder where this will go, especially under a Pam Bondi, a Kash Patel, because I would hope that at a minimum they put different restrictions just through regulation or just through policy and rule. If Congress isn't going to fix it, I don't know.
You're going to have to always depend on the personnel at that point.
Which
I think that it should be if as long as this is out there for the next 2 years, right? And in theory, you have a Donald Trump as president and the control of the Congress the next 2 years, and maybe it'll come up for renewal again, and they'll choose a better option here. But until then, what's stopping the FBI and the Department of Justice for saying, look, we're just going to submit voluntary warrants?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing stopping you. The judges aren't going to admonish you for actually being double sure that you haven't violated someone's civil rights.
Which, tell me if this was the case for you, Steve, in Quantico. I remember, especially going in as a cop already. So already you have knowledge and experience and a background with warrants and with probable cause and with exceptions to the search warrant and all these different things. I remember in our, I think it was constitutional law, and then it even carried over into practical stuff once we got out into Hogan's Alley there. And then even when I was in the field, it was get a warrant, even if you have probable cause to search, even if you have consent to search, just err on the side of getting a warrant. And I remember thinking how dumb that was, because from a legal theory, from a legal perspective, if I have probable cause or your consent, I don't need to get a warrant. But I remember my constitutional law instructor saying, just in the FBI, you err on the side of getting a warrant. Well, okay, well, if that's the case, and that was the case in every other circumstance, why is that not the case with 702? You could, so even their own theory and their own practice doesn't come to fruition, doesn't add up here.
Because they want the tool and they want all the goodies that are attached to it, because they want the ability to find a man and then search for the crime that they happen to commit so they can keep cases going as long as possible. I had the same experience to you, Garrett. They told us we would never, ever make a probable cause arrest, which is a warrantless arrest. You go back after the fact and write a warrant for it. But if the person violates the law in front of your eyeballs, you're allowed to put them into custody and to arrest them. And they said that will never happen. Neither will you ever engage in a vehicle pursuit. And within a couple of months, I engaged in a vehicle pursuit and then made a probable cause arrest on the Indian reservation. And I sent an email off to my legal instructor saying, "Na na 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 na."
Guess what, buddy? I got you.
All right, let's talk about the diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the death, the DIE of the DEI at the DOE. I'm a professional at this,
Oh,
aren't
that's a
I?
lot of letters.
Man, Department of Education takes actions to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion. This comes from the U.S. Department of Education's own website. Donald Trump's order directs all federal agencies to combat illegal private sector DEI preferences, mandates, policies, programs, and activities. The DOE changes immediately disbanded its Diversity and Inclusion Council, which I'm sure people are getting paid six figures to sit on, established by President Barack Obama and two other DEI related agencies. They had developed agencies within the Department of Education specifically for diversity, equity, and inclusion. This decision also terminated training programs. So you and I both had to go through that over from the FBI, which is under the Department of Justice. You had to sit through these mandatory web training things. We had 2 a year. Now it's 3 a year. Maybe that'll go away. And also service contracts valued at $2.6 million. So they were basically paying companies to provide them PowerPoints. So it's basically laundering money to your political allies. You say, hey, look, come up with a PowerPoint presentation that says that white people are bad, and we will pay you $2.6 million for that. And then we will force all of our employees to sit through that PowerPoint presentation. And we'll say that this is part of an initiative from our Diversity and Inclusion Council, which we are also paying half a dozen people somewhere in the area of $150K a year to sit on and dole out that $2.6 million. It's pretty circular.
Yeah, for this reason alone, DEI shouldn't exist, or at least in government. If you want to pursue it on your own as a hobby, fine. If you're into it and you think it's important and you think it matters and you want to be an advocate of it in the workplace, I would say even in the government, even if you work in the government, fine. You do have a First Amendment right to advocate for that. Fine, but not on the taxpayer dollar, especially when it's plain and simple fraud, waste, and abuse, just because of the cost. Have you seen Matt Walsh's "Am I Racist"? Have you seen that yet?
No, I saw What is a Woman, but I
Oh,
didn't
that
read it.
What is a
See part
Woman?
2.
What is a Woman? I think is better. I don't know how you really rate or judge these things, but I walked away from What is a Woman uh, with more, I don't know, not energy, maybe more laughter. Maybe I'm not sure exactly what it was, but when I got done watching "Am I Racist," I just was like, wow, we are in a sad state of affairs here. But he gets into, well, spoiler alert, sorry, but he becomes a certified DEI instructor in it, and he's going to different whatever, but he's throughout the documentary he's putting up what these people charge, and it is absurd. And it's like, oh, they just have found a little niche grift where you're going to find white people who feel bad for being white because for some reason they drank all that Kool-Aid in their life. I don't understand it. I would never apologize for being an American, for being white, for even having a Middle Eastern tinge and a German tinge and an Irish tinge. Why would I ever apologize for that? As if I ever had any control over it. But also, I don't hate people just because they have an African tinge or a Chinese tinge to their DNA. It's insane to me. But the amount of money alone is reason enough to rid every government institution of the DEI crap.
Matt Walsh, I've said, is the photo negative of Borat, Sacha Baron Cohen, where Borat goes in and I don't like his humor. I don't like it because it just makes people who are just trying to be nice and courteous uncomfortable and tries to make fun of them. Matt Walsh goes in and takes the ridiculous people and shows how ridiculous they are and does it with a straight face, kind of like Borat does, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like it's coming from a place of legitimacy. Before moving off the Department of Education and sort of along the lines of the boondoggle that this is, here's just one example, right? There are over 200 web pages attached to the Department of Education, 200 separate web pages that house DEI resources and encourage schools of higher education to promote and endorse harmful ideological programs. 200 websites. So that means they need how many programmers to manage those websites and control those websites and people who are going to be posting those websites. How many jobs were created just for websites that house the exact same literature on them about diversity, equity, inclusion? That's, again, reward our friends, punish our enemies. We're going to pay them out, take American taxpayer dollars to do that. And then those people will have a comfy job. They could probably work from home. It's just, after all, managing a website. So when you're not doing that, when it's not, the error can't find the website, when we have to Control Alt Delete the whole thing, why don't you just go out and protest from the river to the sea, something like that, right? Or get out the vote for us.
Right. It's the DEI stuff. It's one of the big pieces of the current administration that it's like, okay, we are getting our head screwed back on straight, because throughout my life, and especially in the last, let's just call it the last 5 years, I could count on probably one hand how many people I've encountered in real life who I would say, oh, they're in the DEI cult. They're just few and far between, because real people aren't concerned with that type of thing. I will throw into that bucket the purple-haired acting security officer who gave me my walking papers. Her name was Layla Blake. Purple hair.
How dare you assume that gender?
Oh yes, sorry. I am assuming that she is a female. She may say that she isn't.
All right, let's pivot over to one of the executive actions that I was alerted to, language in there, and I went and confirmed it. Garrett, you're going to love this. All right. And this is the executive order pertaining to, we're going to have two genders now, right? Where Layla would definitely be a she, not a they, them. So this is the presidential action from the White House, whitehouse.gov. The executive order, or the title of it, is Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. So it's a mouthful, but I actually read through the executive order, and it's got some pretty clear guidance in there that I don't really have a problem with. It says it is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female. These sexes are not changeable and are grounded in fundamental and incontrovertible reality. All good. Here is where I think that they went a step further, and I love it. All right. Quote, female means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. Male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell. I love it. I love that.
I love this, because they're also slyly inserting in there that when does life begin? At conception, of course, which it does.
So hats off. I mean, the all the wailing and gnashing of teeth, the Project 2025. I would love to see those guys be like, yeah, we told you we weren't going to do it. We're doing it all now.
Yes.
So getting out of the woods, some people are getting the monkey off their back. I've got two pieces from our friend Joe Hanneman over at The Blaze, who's been covering January 6th. What do you think Joe Hanneman's going to do now? What's he going to write about?
Dude, good question. Here's what he's got to do. He's probably already thinking this. He's got to just keep doing it. Just now start doing exposés on the individuals that have been pardoned, that have been out. And I mean, he could do this the rest of his life then.
Oh, you nailed it, because those are what these pieces are about, right? And how it's not complete yet. It's not over yet for so many of these guys. So this comes from Joe Hanneman over at The Blaze, U.S. Attorney for D.C., who is now Ed Martin, the acting U.S. Attorney's Office. I texted him yesterday, by the way. I have his contact information.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because I exist in a really weird timeline.
Yeah. Hey, Ed, do you need any investigators over there?
I was alerting him to one of the assistant U.S. attorneys who was particularly egregious on the J6 task force. I have got moles that said what this individual did and how he did it, and it was completely illegal. And that guy is going to be in a little bit of trouble, hopefully.
Good.
So Joe Hanneman reports that the U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia at that point was moving to vacate probation. It has now been vacated. So this is a little bit dated for the Oath Keepers. But I wanted to talk about before Ed Martin took that action, these guys, the Oath Keepers, because their sentences were commuted and not totally pardoned, there was going to be restrictions on them still after they had been let out of custody. And it is ludicrous, right?
Yes.
So let me pull this up.
I would say while you're getting that, I would just say that this falls directly, in my opinion, in my experience, in my training, all of those three combined, which I know that it can be varied, but if you're going to keep the pressure on people like them after they've had their sentences commuted, that is what is following the letter of the law and not the rule of the law. You know damn well if you're in federal probation, federal PMP, or whatever, even if it was at a state level, whatever. If you're gonna keep the screws in someone just because you can, that also is out of bounds and not what a reasonable law enforcement officer would do. But why would we be surprised?
Well, they were going to forbid them from going to Washington, D.C.
Oh, F off.
Okay.
Give me
And
a break.
the one comment before the particular ones about Stewart Rhodes, which was ridiculous, that I got from Ed Martin was, quote, if a judge decided that Jim Biden, General Mark Milley, or another individual were forbidden to visit America's capital, even after receiving a last-minute preemptive pardon from the former president, I believe most Americans would object.
Uh-huh.
All right. So Stewart Rhodes, in terms of his release, prohibited him from using social media of any kind without permission from his probation agent.
Okay.
He couldn't
Like he's a
travel.
pedophile. You can't go on the internet because you might look up kitty porn. Come on.
Couldn't travel outside his home district without permission, had to consent to government search of his computers at any time.
No.
And this is a commuted sentence,
This is
right?
yeah.
He barred from using apps like Skype, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation, and others.
Okay.
So the last thing here is when many January 6 defendants received pardons or sentence commutations were ordered to pay restitution to the architect of the Capitol because of the damage that was there, right? And medical expenses of the police officers. And while others were issued huge fines, the fines that they were issued equaled the amount that they were able to raise to pay their legal fees.
Dude.
So the judges were looking at, hey, you set up a Give, Send, Go, and you were able to raise $50,000 for your legal defense. I'm going to impose a fine of $50,000. Now, good luck paying your legal.
Okay,
fees.
think of this from a tyranny standpoint, from an arbitrary use of your power standpoint. If I raise $3,000 because I'm not as well known J6er or whatever, and you raise 100, and then this guy raised 50, and that gal raised $7,000, and this guy raised 25, and you're just sending out the fines to the dollar amount that our Give, Send, Goes was. That is tyranny. That is arbitrary and despotic abuse of your authority.
Arbitrary is the key term there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then let's talk about this other one that Joe Hanneman talked about. This is Luke Coffey, who was the guy who was with the giant crutch trying to block the crowd from getting to the police officers, trying to kind of stand in the gap. And he was screaming at people, you should be praying. And he tried to protect Roseanne Broylan. So
I mean, think of that. That's the guy that the FBI went after.
Oh, yeah. And they went after him big time, and they got a conviction despite the fact that the police officer who they alleged he assaulted admitted on the stand that he didn't touch her. That's the Star Chamber that we went to on this one.
Because that's a police officer who says, hey, I'm under oath. I need to tell the truth.
And that was a DC Metro police officer. We'll get to her in a second. So J6 case, it was dismissed 40 days after the judge found Luke Coffey guilty of assault on Officer Lila Morris.
Okay, if you're the officer and you testify that you weren't assaulted by this guy,
she told the truth.
How in God's green earth could you get found guilty? Oh man, this stuff. There is no. I'm grateful for the pardons and everything, but there is no fixing what these evildoers have done.
So Capitol Police security video and open source video from those who surrounded the mouth of the tunnel showed that Coffey stepped in front and center, implored police to stop. He'd earlier faced the crowd and repeatedly implored them to stop and to pray. Coffey was targeted with heavy streams of pepper spray at least 8 times.
Wow.
DC Metro officer Lila Morris worked her way to the front of the tunnel, was crouched behind a bystander trying to escape, picked a wooden walking stick from the ground and used it as a weapon. She started to hit Roseanne Boyland in her body like multiple times while she was going through some sort of distress. She was on the ground, asphyxiating, they believe at the time. And this officer was beating her with a stick on the ground.
Jeez.
So during cross-examination at Coffey's trial, Lila Morris said that Coffey did not assault her. Coffey picked up a aluminum crutch and held it over his head. He said it was an effort to make himself as large as possible to be a barrier between the police and the crowd.
Hmm.
The DOJ blamed Coffey for the fact that police did not render aid to Roseanne Boyland. They said because he was standing there with a crutch, that prevented them from giving her medical attention. That's why she died.
Give me a break.
And at the December 13th, 2024 verdict reading, Judge Contreras found Coffey guilty of 7 counts, including felony assault on 2 police officers with the aluminum crutch that he didn't touch them with. He found Coffey not guilty of 1 misdemeanor. But now, 40 days after that, because of the pardons that were issued, Coffey's getting to go free. But again, you can never restore what was taken from the person in light of sleepless nights and stress, financial strain. I don't know his financial situation. Maybe they lost jobs, lost family contacts, public humiliation. I mean, if this guy ever seeks to do anything again, like this is going to be, even this story from Joe Hanneman is going to be reflected on that if somebody just does a simple Google search.
Yeah, right. It will follow them the rest of their lives, no matter what happens going forward. And yeah, their name, as long as the internet exists, you'll be able to find out about Mr. Coffey and any of the others. And I just can't get over this fact of the judge, the jury, the court just steamrolling the truth. And I know it's happened in many other cases, but I'm certain I could probably list half a dozen examples of times where I did or didn't arrest someone. I did arrest someone that I would rather not have, but the probable cause was so strong, or my discretion wasn't available because of other state law, and then vice versa, where I didn't arrest someone, but the evil inside of me, the vindictiveness inside of me wanted to, but I didn't because I couldn't. And then in this case, it's just screw it, screw that, screw your conscience, screw the truth, screw the Constitution, screw the statutory parameters of even the laws that we're using. We're just going to do it anyways because we can. That's an alleged land of the free.
The agents on top of the police officer here, similar to the agent that went after Eithan Haim.
Yep.
They allegedly reviewed this evidence and they said probable cause exists to put this person in a cage, and they went forth. And the judge who was attached to it as well. I mean, there's no way any of these people should ever be allowed to exist in a system that's allegedly supposed to be fair and impartial, balanced, just like a blindfolded lady justice with the scales. Doesn't matter who you are, how much money you have, who your God is, who you love, all those sort of tropes that are out there. No, it matters. And anybody that was part of this, again, in a situation that is suboptimal where the social compact has been shattered, we can't ever get to any sort of semblance of normalcy again without accountability at this point.
Right.
And the policies that we've seen in the last week and a half, this isn't my original thought here. I was listening to Jesse Kelly talking about it. These objectively good things that are happening, regardless of who the president is, that should be normal.
Right.
Like normal things where we deport illegal aliens. We shouldn't be like, yeah, we are so back. We should just be like, yeah, it's a Tuesday.
Yes.
Of course, we live in a country that deports illegal aliens and doesn't spy on its citizens.
Exactly right. Exactly right. The recent massive swaths of arrests of illegals that we've seen has actually given me again cause for concern, because what does that tell you? It tells you that ICE and CBP and maybe even DEA, I know they're helping out, and ATF, and now FBI is even getting tapped to help. That means the government, our law enforcement agencies, knew where these people were and they did nothing. There was no suspendable type who rose his hand and said, hey, not only are these people violating our immigration laws, they've violated all these other laws. Like I saw one guy recently who it was a child porn and trafficking and drugs. Another one recently, 150 fentanyl pills, or it might have even been 150,000. I don't know, whatever, any amount. And it's all tied to the illegal immigration issue. So you got drug trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking, because if you're an illegal immigrant, you're getting human trafficked over here. And the government knew. The government knows where you are because they've been rounding up hundreds of you a day. And so for 4 years, we did nothing. And there was no federal agent who said, this is wrong and it needs to be made known. That should give everybody some concern, because who the hell are we hiring? Where are the people who actually meant their oath and who said, even if my boss says not to do it and it's wrong, I'm going to at least make it known. I don't know. I struggle with that.
All right, so the final topic that I want to cover down on today, what does it always seem to go back to, Garrett?
COVID. Always COVID.
Did you know now that the CIA is saying that the lab leak theory might not be a conspiracy theory after all? Reporting from the New York Times,
How about that?
The CIA, the agency,
now
favor
favors
the lab leak theory to explain COVID's origins.
Anybody with a brain favored that theory 5 years ago.
This is a very long piece because it's the New York Times and they're pedantic jerks, but I did pull a couple of excerpts from it, and I will not hesitate to use them out of context because I want to. So the CIA has said for years that it did not have enough information to conclude whether the COVID pandemic emerged naturally from a wet market in Wuhan or from an accidental leak at a research lab there. But the agency issued a new assessment this week with analysts saying they now favor the lab leak theory. Let me be very clear. There is no new intelligence behind the agency's shift, officials said. Rather, it is based on the same evidence it has been chewing on for months. In the final weeks of the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan, who was one of the few who were actually running the administration, because we know Joe Biden is senile, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, ordered a new classified review of the pandemic's origin. As part of that review, the agency's previous director, William Burns, told analysts that they needed to take a position on the origins of COVID, though he was agnostic as to which theory they should embrace. So there was no pressure on them. And this is in the closing days. This is very clearly the CIA trying to get ahead of Radcliffe taking over as CIA director, right? Very much like the FDA banning red dye number 3 before you can get a RFK Jr. at the head of HHS.
This to me is akin to the J6 stuff we just talked about, and I know it's for Radcliffe, for Bondi, for Cash. It's going to be like drinking water from a fire hose to some degree, but at some point, all of them have to get people who are trustworthy, trusted, to start digging into internal files and start finding the people who were responsible for withholding the truth from Americans, from subverting it, from lying about it, like in the case of the J6 stuff. All the agents and analysts and chief division counsels and assistant division counsels who gave their stamp of approval, instead of saying, hey, even though I'm getting pressure from DOJ for the J6 stuff, the probable cause for this just isn't there, or this is being weaponized in such an egregious fashion that we shouldn't take it. Or in the CIA's case, hey, I'm a case officer in the CIA and I have reasonable proof and belief that the CIA is lying about where the COVID origins started and where it was leaked from and where it came from. It's been years and years of this. So people need to be held accountable in a bigger fashion than just moving your DEI director to some other position in headquarters. That's not going to cut it.
Do you think when Radcliffe gets in there or anybody gets in there, they look at the assessments, the materials might have something like this map that I found, which shows this is a Google map.
Look at this.
The wet market to the lab.
Wow.
And the different paths you would go to get there. The most circuitous route would be about 23 kilometers. So roughly like 13, 14 miles.
Yeah.
Or it could have been the bat that flew 600 miles, bypassed all parties, and then landed in the wet market and gnawed on a pangolin that vomited into a stew, and somebody ingested that stew.
If you were just listening, in hilarious fashion, the Chinese have also named a lake Dong Lake, and it's it's adjacent to the lab.
They
So
don't call him the best color man in the business for nothing, folks. Good pull, Garrett. All right, Garrett, I've got a good palate cleanse that I think we actually got to watch it and then maybe interpret it because it might make people angry, but I want to flip that switch in True American Radicals podcast. But as always, what are your thoughts for the day?
Man, I got a lot of thoughts. First, I want to pop this up here. It's a callback to our DEI story a little bit. You're gonna love this, Steve. You are gonna love this. So are you, everybody. So if you're just listening,
Good gracious,
we got books here called The New Jim Crow, Caste, White Fragility. There's a couple others in there. If you look into them a little bit, they are all DEI nonsense garbage. And guess where they were found, Steve? So this is the FBI Kansas City library. And I wonder if they still exist there. And I forwarded this to Congress. I guess I just don't care at this point. This was one of my protected disclosures. I said way back then, hey, this is the type of thing going on in FBI offices. This is the type of garbage being pushed down our throats where, oh, any employee can come and check out a book. And they're all DEI trash. And, like all the protected disclosures, of course, they took it. But like most, I don't think they really did much with it. Maybe that will change going forward.
Why wasn't there a 1619 project there? That was a fail.
Yeah, that was a fail. But I guess similarly along those lines, what does this all come back to? And I would say that it comes back to original sin, Steve. In Romans 5:12, it says, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. I blame Adam. I blame Adam for all of the failure and all of the sin and all of the demasculinity and all of the lack of leadership, because men are weak and they say, oh, I'm just going to have to fold over. No, you're not. Gird your loins and act like men.
And a perfect transition to today's palate cleanse, because we're going to have a conversation afterwards, real briefly, I think, about the responsibility of the man here, who looks like a man because he's wearing, his sports themed T-shirt and his backwards hat, and he's drinking a brewski, and he's trying to be woke and talk to his better half about women in the draft.
Oh, by the way, I read something really scary today.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, apparently the higher-ups in Washington are already talking about bringing back the draft.
Wait, the draft? Like the military?
Yeah, but obviously it'd be totally different this time. I mean, they probably include women. They definitely have to.
How about I do the dishes? You go relax.
Okay.
But go on. What were you saying?
Oh, just how a draft would be so different now because, how much society's changed.
Oh, really? I don't know what you're even talking about.
Well, I mean, like, women make up half the workforce now.
Do not get me started about those darn feminists.
What are you talking about? We've come a long way in the past 100 years as far as social progress goes, don't you think?
I don't know. I like to leave all that big, complex thinking up to my husband.
Well, I think it's great. I mean, without the suffragette movement, you and all other women wouldn't even have the right to vote.
Yeah, but voting's a really big responsibility. Do we really want people as emotional as women to decide the leader of the free world?
What about Title IX? I mean, we watched more women's college hoops than men's last year.
But the more I think about it, sports, like war, is for boys.
But without feminism, we would have missed out on some of our most inspiring world leaders. Margaret Thatcher, AOC.
Personally, I think their husbands are the real inspirations for supporting their silly little dreams.
What about equal opportunity in the workplace? I mean, you're an executive at a large accounting firm. That's awesome.
All I know is that there is a reason that most CEOs are men.
I don't think it's a good reason.
So where'd you read all this stuff about the war anyway?
Oh, some crazy guy on Twitter with like 14 followers went on like a 20-part rant.
Wait, it was just a guy on Twitter?
Yeah, and also the New York Times.
Oh, the Times?
Yeah, that same crazy guy, he paid a ton of money to get a full-page
Wow,
ad.
I guess they'll just print anything nowadays.
Yeah, but I mean, to be fair, all the other major news outlets have been talking about it.
We'll be waiting for you when you get back from war.
That's great. Very well done.
Look, that's a dude who's just trying to push off responsibility. Not worried about the women can join too. They're definitely not more important than I am, right?
Of course not. They we're equal.
So if anybody gets
we're
mad at me
equal but different.
for saying it's a critique of the women, no, that's one who's asking and trying to hold her man accountable. And he's just trying to have his Savannah Bananas t-shirt and backwards cap, drinking a brewski, saying, look, why don't you come on up and fight in the front lines with me?
That's right. Which we've talked about here before. As a former infantryman, awful idea for many, many reasons, which we don't need to belabor it anymore. We get into it plenty, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And wanted to say thank you again. We had a subscription gift come through. Want to definitely recognize Ed Allen threw it up there.
Oh, thanks, Ed.
Yep, Ed gifted 5 subscriptions to the American Radicals podcast. Thanks, Ed Allen, for that one.
Yeah, that's
guys.
awesome. That's a great way to support for sure.
So that'll do it for us today. We are talking about it. I think we're going to have to do a Mystery Science Theater coverage of Kash Patel's hearing on Thursday. More details to follow. Let us know if that's something that you want, because that starts at 9:30 Eastern time on Thursday this week. If you want us to cover it, we will do that and give our thoughts as we go, as we root on our quarterback fight with Kash. It's definitely something that we're considering. Guys, have a great day. Thanks for joining us. And as always, we will see you next time.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.